party really was the far, far right of the Republican Party, and that to me always looked like more of an internal party struggle. I don't know how Steve saw it from his angle, but you may not like it, but if politics worked like the free market system, supposedly those free market stuff, we would have a third party, because the fastest growing electorate in Florida are people who register unaffiliated. But then what do you do? Are they unaffiliated because they're mad about this issue or dissatisfied on this point? There is not one single area of cohesion, and a big campaign needs money, it needs ballot stuffers, it needs volunteers, it needs a whole lot of people who agree on something. I just don't see anything else happening. Okay,
Vice Mayor Wodraska, why hasn't a more effective movement emerged from this frustration that's on both sides of the political spectrum?
Yeah, I agree with most everything Randy said. I found it interesting.
Stop right there. We're good.
I did find it interesting that clearly the Tea Party came in with great force throughout the state of Florida. I think that Rick Scott was elected governor by the Tea Party. I think Allen West was elected in my neck of the woods through the Tea Party. And I found it interesting to see a little bit of backlash for Mr. West to lose a mostly Republican redrawn district to newly elected Patrick Murphy. And I'm guessing that Rick Scott and his folks are a little bit nervous in the upcoming years, in a couple years. Although it remains to be seen if the Democrats can send anybody besides Charlie Christie there as a realistic candidate. But, one of the things that I find difficult, and what I agree with Randy, is the infrastructure, the money and how it takes to put a campaign together. But I will tell you, I'm actually a disgruntled registered Republican in the sense that, I try to say that less government is better. I think that the amount of debt that we're taking on is unbelievable. But I also don't care if gay or lesbian couples want to get married, and a woman's right to choose. I think that I don't see why the government or why a bunch of white guys that look like us stand up and say, hey, this is how you ought to treat your body, or this is how you ought to react. And so the fact of the matter is, I couldn't get elected by my own party to represent my own party, because you have to cater to this other group. So that's the challenge, and I think that I'm more of a centrist or in the middle, but and I think that I represent a large portion of it, but it's tough to get elected that way.
Okay, and Kim, we wanted you to weigh in on this one too. Why isn't there a more effective movement? And not necessarily a party, but maybe a movement, for example, the civil rights movement that we had here in the 60s. Why can't people get together in a more effective way these days when there is more technology? There does seem to be more opportunity to contact elected officials and get involved.
Well, I agree with Randy also. I remember speaking with former Senator Phil Lewis, and he talked about what it took to run his campaign back in the day, and then what it takes now to actually get elected and run a party. But I guess I would say I think there is a movement emerging. I think, again, technology is driving that. I don't know if you see a political spring like an Arab Spring. But certainly our younger generation is more plugged in, and we have to learn to communicate with them in the ways that they like to receive communication and share communication with us. But I think we are seeing citizens reawakening, becoming involved. We've seen groups such as the League of Women League of Women Voters gain traction. The Center for Applied Ethics was actually created by citizen concern about the way some things were happening locally, not just in government, but in business, nonprofits. They wanted to see a change. And so this was a citizen-driven movement that created change in our county, or created a vehicle for moving change forward in the way we do things. So I believe that change is happening. It's in an embryonic stage, but with more events like this and more dialogue and conversation, I think that it's going to continue.
And more students. We're getting more students involved. To our last planned question, then open this up to the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, there's a microphone over here. On the question is about voter turnout. Pardon? Oh, okay. Let's try to squeeze that in. Let's move on to the turnout question. Voter turnout in the presidential elections is normally a little over 50%. Voter turnout in municipal elections hovers at around 4 or 5%. Why do people vote for president and not for mayor? And why do 50% of citizens not vote at all? Should voting be mandatory?
No. No, voting should not be mandatory. If you can't rouse yourself to vote, that's your own fault. You lose the right to complain.
Dr. O'Flannery-Anderson, and then Congressman Deutch.
I would just say it's frustrating because really sometimes the candidates that have the most impact on us are local positions. Mayors, county commissioners, they're making decisions every day that really affect our lives. So I'm very frustrated with voter turnout. I think some of it must have to do with our busy lives and we're pulled in so many directions and we don't have time to wait in line to vote. But it's so critically important. So I think in our education system, in schools, when our kids are learning, that they have to learn about this. I think civics classes have been eliminated from some of our curriculum. And so how can we expect people to vote if they don't know the importance of it? If they don't have the opportunity to interact with our elected officials and see the issues that they're deliberating about and the topics they're discussing and the decisions they're making. So I think in our education system, at the dinner table, and then I guess our responsibility to make sure that people know about the issues. But I think starting at the local level, the local issues are really what have an impact on our daily lives. Roads, water, all of those things are so important to us. And I guess we take them for granted or we think they just happen. And our education system and our family discussions have to better inform our young people to appreciate them.
I was at a wedding recently, and a young woman whose daughter of a friend of ours came up to me and said, "I'm so excited! I finally got to vote for you. I turned 18. I had the right to vote, and I went out and I voted for you, and it was such a great moment for me." And I looked at her. I said, "That's so terrific." And then she paused and said, "And I'll do it again in 4 years." Right? Forget the municipal elections. I'd like her to come out. I'd like her to at least come out every 2 years and vote for me. Look, I think there are all kinds of reasons that people don't participate. Starting with the fact that we make it. Instead of making it easier to vote, apparently there's a question on online voting, we continue in Florida and all across the country, legislature after legislature, governor after governor passed laws to make it harder to vote. Why is it when it's possible for us to do, it's possible to do almost anything online, and I guess it's going to get to the question, why is it so hard for us to figure out how to vote online? Why is it so hard to have a system which we're advocating for in Washington, legislation I'm sponsoring, that says when you sign up to do anything with the state, anything, when your name goes into the state, then you're going to be registered to vote as well. Why can't we register to vote on the day of elections? Why do we make it harder instead of easier? The perception among a lot of young people is that there's a reason for it, that yes, they need to be better informed. They obviously need to know that there are elections more than every 4 years, but they look at a system when they happen to check the news or hear people talking about it, they look at a system that seems to be created to make it harder for young people, harder for seniors, harder for African Americans, harder for particular groups to cast their vote. That has to change. And when it does, and Congress is working on this, and I know the state legislature is working on it, and perhaps our governor, as he heads towards an election, will realize how important it's going to be this as well. Then there'll be a greater motivation.
I think Congressman Deutch is right about the access to voting. I think he's wrong about online voting, 100% wrong.
Mayor Abrams, did you want to comment on that briefly, so we can get to the audience questions, please?
Yeah, we just picking up on the online. I mean, we shouldn't vote online because it's not safe. We all know in our daily lives that the internet is making things cheaper, easier, faster, but not necessarily safer. We know that there are hundreds of thousands of attempts to hack computers every day for your bank accounts and your credit card information. Can you imagine if the payoff was Congress or the Senate or the presidency? You know, you can use technology to solve a lot of the issues involving voting convenience. Frankly, some of the things don't need extra technology. You had the 102-year-old woman that we all saw from Miami-Dade on the State of the Union. And frankly, this was my experience on election day. There are a lot of senior citizens who have flexible schedules. I'm not talking about the folks who have to work and maybe need that extra time at the beginning of the previous week to vote. Could have shown up at the polls after 12 o'clock noon on election day, as I did and many others did, and not waited for more than 5 minutes. But they're told, well, you need to vote or your vote's not going to count and you need to stand in line for, even if it means standing in line for 6 hours, when you don't have to stand in line for 6 hours in certain cases. Now, can technology be used to make the voting experience more convenient? Absolutely. I, for one, think that we should have more regional polling places on election day and get away from this anachronism that you have to vote in your neighborhood, church, or school on election day. As you know, people get in their cars in the morning, they go off to work, they go off to school, and so you can produce a customized ballot at any location in the county where you can vote the offices that are up in your precinct. Look, no system is foolproof, and we know that better than anyone here in Palm Beach County. But what can be done now with a few keystrokes, at least used to be done with thousands of Chicagoans waiting in line for hours on end. So no online voting.
Okay, with that, the audience has been very patient, so let's open this up to audience questions. And audience members, please keep your questions brief. Speak as clearly as you can. If you want to say your name at the beginning, that would be great. And try to keep it on topic to presidents and civic duty. Let's start over here on the left at the microphone. If you want to ask a question, please get in line with the microphone.
My name is Terrence Glassman. Without question, we have a dysfunctional government in this country. And the 800-pound gorilla in the room that nobody's talking about is Citizens United. The Constitution never accounted for the outrageous amounts of money that were spent in this last national election. Billions of dollars is obscene. And until we get this Citizens United reversed, we will have situations like happened in Montana, where the Koch brothers pumped $8 million of their own money to unseat a moderate Republican to put in an extremist. And what's happening is our congressional system is becoming polarized at the extremes. So nobody can agree on anything.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Is there a question?
This is not statements, it's a
The question is, what's being done in order to overturn Citizens United and get a congressional amendment on the cost of the money that goes into our election campaigns?
Congressman Deutch.
I didn't talk about that because I knew someone would bring it up, because you're right. It underlies every single discussion that we're having here. What's being done about it is next week when I go back to Washington, Senator Sanders and I are going to reintroduce a resolution to overturn Citizens United to ensure that democracy is
Excellent, thank you. On the right here?
Can I ask Congressman, there are the labor unions also?
Yeah, the answer is yes. The answer is the constitutional amendment that we've drafted makes very clear that democracy is reserved for the people. And it is the people who vote in elections, it is the people who should be able to contribute to